In this special episode of Mind Blowers, Super Trends experts Lars Tvede and Daniel Kafer tackle the top 25 major events they predict for 2025. From global breakthroughs to unexpected twists, will their crystal ball hold true, or will reality prove them wrong? Tune in to find out, and see if you agree with their vision of the future.
Hi, and welcome to the Mind Blowers podcast. Today we're going to talk about 2025 predictions, which is obviously always quite difficult. But when I and Lars we are out and doing our keynotes, we always get a lot of questions about what we think is going to happen in 2025 and the years to come. So what kind of questions do we normally get, Lars?
That's geopolitics, general economics, technology, typically.
Yeah, I get quite a lot about the metaverse and social media, possibly because I've been working with Meta and Google and companies like that. But we have gathered a list of 25 questions we get most often about 2025. So we're going to try to predict whether we think it's likely that this thing will happen in 2025, and if not, possibly give a year where we think it will happen. So the first question we get a lot is a really difficult one to predict as well. So it's about the Nasdaq index. Do we think that it will exceed 22,000 within 2025? So Lars, what do you think?
Well, that's about 10% higher than we are today. So I think it's quite likely that we get a meaningful correction, but also that it goes higher at some point. And the reason is that if we have falling interest rates and a fairly good geopolitical situation, fairly high growth in the US, which I think all are plausible outcomes, then we could get the beginning of a run up to a bubble. So I don't think it's a bubble now, but it might become a bubble over the next years. So yeah, I would say likely.
So the second one is about biohacker Bryan Johnson, which we both follow, and whether his social following on YouTube will double from 1.3 million to 2.6 million. I think it will double. I think the longevity mania will gain in power. So I feel quite confident that he will grow and he will double.
Me too. I just saw a Netflix documentary about him yesterday. I think that alone will do it.
So that one we definitely agree on. I also think we'll see others kind of longevity celebrities get more and more traction. The third one is in the same vein. So Bryan Johnson actually has a leaderboard with people in the world who age the slowest. And here's the question: will anybody get below 50% in aging rate? So basically, you only age 6 months during 1 year. And this is, you can only get on it with a certified test. So you can't just write in and get on it. So currently we are at 58. What are your thoughts, Lars? Will that happen this year?
I think it's demanding. I have to say, by the way, that the one who leads the board is not Bryan Johnson. He's right now is number 3 on the board. The one who leads is somebody who trains with the trainer I've been using for 14 years. And he's the one who is aging at 58% of normal speed. And without doing nearly as much as Bryan Johnson does. So that makes me really wonder whether there are 130 different pills a day and all the other things he do, how much of it is really useful. But I think on the basis of that this is an emerging mania, which I think it is, that it's fairly likely that somebody gets from 58% down to 50%, which, if you think about it, would be really interesting, actually. So that means you age at a half the normal speed. So the average longevity is, depending on the country, but in the late 70s. Perhaps there's somebody who are already living now in a way that will enable them to become 140 years. Interesting thought, at least.
Yeah, I think it will happen in 2025. And I think alone because I think more than maybe 3 times more people will actually send in their tests for this Olympics. So I think, in that way, the statistics will probably work in our favor. Number 4 is about whether one of the big players, such as OpenAI and Google, are going to claim that they have passed the Turing test with one of their models. Personally, I think this is highly likely, as we're seeing kind of the IQ ratings of these models get better and better. Probably they need to do a specific model, or you need to restrict some questions. But I think as long as it's the old Turing test, where you don't have an expert to do the Turing test, but a normal person, I think it will be done this year.
I think so too. And one of the challenges is actually that, as you said, you have to make it more stupid than it is in many different ways, because it doesn't work that if you ask it a super complicated question about anything and it answers instantly with knowledge that no normal person would ever have. That would reveal that this is a computer, not a human. Yeah, so it has to be smart enough, but also appear to be dumb enough to come across as a real human.
So number 5 is, will a new social media platform overtake Facebook as the biggest one in terms of daily or monthly active users? So I get this very often, and people always say, yeah, definitely something else will overtake Facebook, and Facebook is on the decline. I think this is one of the biggest misunderstandings in social media. Facebook is simply so large at this point in terms of monthly active users that nobody can compete with it. And I would even dare to say, I don't think this will happen in the next 5 years, and it will certainly not happen in 2025.
Yeah, true. So you see different social media come up, be popular for a while, and then people drop out and drop back to what they were using before. So I totally agree. And I have to say, for those who don't know, that you have been a regional manager for Meta, so you kind of know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I guess and it's because I got so many questions as the country head, where people already in 2014 said Facebook is on the decline and nobody uses it. So I got so used to look at the numbers, and I still follow them. So the next one is one for you. It's number 6. So do you expect that there will be a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine in 2025?
Hey there, future enthusiasts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join the Mind Blowers community. We're on a mission to help you thrive in the age of AI, and with your support, we can make that happen. Each week, our host, author, and former Facebook executive Daniel Kafer interviews amazing leaders in AI, robotics, longevity, and so much more. We're committed to bringing you the best content possible. Subscribe now and let us know what you want to hear. We're all ears.
I think it's fairly likely, and Ukraine is have already stated they're interested in it. Russia has they're expressing a more reserved opinion. However, the Russian economy is really squeezed. Their inflation officially it's around 9%, but there has been a study of a large number of people's actual daily shopping habits where it was way higher. Which also explains why their interest rates is more than 20%. The ruble has been falling about 30% this year. As we speak, it's very weak. They are emptying their reserves. Russia cannot borrow money from anybody. Nobody wants to lend money to Russia. And he is also, Putin's running a political risk with all the dead and mutilated people, with a part of the Russian territory occupied by Ukraine, which means that about 200,000 Russians are displaced, etc., etc. So I think Russia, actually, they would also like to get out of this situation. So on that basis, and because Donald Trump is a deal maker who has committed very strongly to arranging this, facilitating this, I think it will happen.
Well, now we're actually going to talk about Trump and I guess Elon Musk, because we're going to talk about whether the US will reduce the debt to GDP ratio in 2025, I guess as a result of the DOGE department. So what are your thoughts on that?
I just want to say that how big the country's debt is not really a critical question. It's how big is it compared to GDP? So you can have unchanged debt, but high GDP growth, and then the debt burden becomes less and less. So it's critically both the level of the debt and the debt servicing burden are both critically high in the US, and they need to do something about it. So they will cut taxes, and then they'll have the DOGE program to cut spending, to describe some elements of their economy in very simple terms. One issue I have with that is that when you cut taxes, you have an instant hit to the revenues. You also have a growth effect, but that accumulates slowly over many years, and that means that the first effect is that deficit growth, and then the second order effect can easily be that the debt goes down because of the lower taxes, as you've seen in Switzerland, for instance. And then the second thing is the DOGE about cutting public expenditure. Depends how you do it. So in Argentina, Milei actually managed to cut public expenditure by 30% within 1 year, which is very, very big number. In America, what Elon Musk has stated publicly is that people who get fired from the public sector would have 2 years severance, so salary paid up to 2 years. I don't know if they will actually do that, but if that is the way they did it or will do it, then it will take some time before the savings kick in. So my best guess is that the debt in itself grows quite rapidly during the first year, perhaps also the second year. And the GDP effect of all the things they do, cutting tax, stimulating, deregulating, and so on, will catch up, but it will not catch up immediately. So perhaps year 2 or 3, or 3 and 4, you will see debt to GDP start going down because of the policies, but it might get worse before it gets better.
Thank you. So the next one we have is whether a major war will erupt in 2025. So something of the scale of the Ukraine-Russia war.
I think it's unlikely. So if people look around geopolitical atlas and say, where do you have a risk of that? Iran? No, Iran is under huge pressure. Israel has just taken out most of the air defenses. They're completely vulnerable to bombing of their oil export infrastructure, of the nuclear development sites, etc. I don't think they want to try any adventures. Taiwan or China and Taiwan is a possibility, but then I don't think China, if they want to attack Taiwan militarily, that they would do it yet at all. And if they want to do anything, they might blockade it instead. But also, I don't think yet the economy is quite fragile. I don't think their military is ready. So I think the probabilities, in my opinion, is fairly small. And all the saber rattling you see from Russia won't come to anything, I think, because Russia, they've lost pretty much half of their military hardware, conquering part of Ukraine, which is like close to 0.5% of Russia already. So they are stretched to the utmost limit, and they cannot do more. In fact, they're doing more than they can right now. So it's difficult for me to see where it should come from.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very difficult to find at least a short-term benefit for any country for going into a war. I think we've seen that with Russia and Ukraine. So the next one is a little bit of a coin toss. I think it's whether Bitcoin will end up above $100,000 in 2025. Again, I think it's very, very difficult to say anything about, but looking at Bitcoin is very volatile, and it has been increasing a lot in 24. My guess is that it will break the ceiling of 100,000 during 2025, but I think it will end 2025 lower than $100,000.
Okay, can I just say higher just to have another opinion?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Of course you can.
It's really difficult for me to guess. I think that if you have falling interest rate in the US, and if the Trump, or I will always say that the Trump Elon regime is very pro crypto and Bitcoin, that might contribute to it going higher. But difficult to say.
It's definitely a difficult one.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
here's another difficult one. Will we see robo-taxis in a major European city in 2025? So similar to what we're seeing in the US, in, for example, San Francisco, and I think Las Vegas and Arizona has joined as well with introducing these robo-taxis.
Super high likelihood. For one thing, the main car producing nations like Germany, they need to be ahead of these kind of things. They cannot be behind. Not far behind. So they're simply for political reasons, they have to step on it and launch these things.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'll probably see it in Germany first. I would say we will not see it in like France or Scandinavia for a couple of years at least.
France is also a big car producer, so they might also want to do it. But I would guess somebody does.
Okay, let's move on to number 11, and that is whether Netflix will release a TV series or a series or a film made by artificial intelligence alone. And I think, I would say what qualifies here is that the video part is AI alone. The script doesn't have to be AI alone. I think that will actually happen. Whether it will be a super popular winning one, possibly not. But we've already seen advertising Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Toys R Us in 2024. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't see like a series or film this year.
I think so too. If for no other reason than just because there are so many people who are interested in just seeing what AI can do, that they would watch it just to get a sense of the state of the art. So it's a yes from me also.
Okay, and number 12 is, I guess, another one for me. So that is whether we'll see a popular game selling more than 1 million copies with non-player characters controlled by AI. So basically, that would mean a game where you talk to the non-player characters in the game, just like you would talk to any other person. So I don't think this will happen in 25. I think we'll have like smaller indie games where this will happen in 25. And we've already seen this in games in 24, but it has been with mods developed by the gamers themselves. So the technology is there, but since it takes so long to develop the big games that sell more than 1 million copies, I think it will not happen before 26.
I will trust you on this.
Yeah, then in turn, I will trust you on the next one because it's about inflation and whether inflation will go below 2% in either the US or in the EU in a full quarter this year.
Right, just about EU. So EU is a bunch of countries, but then US, of course, is a bunch of states. And the European, pan-European or EU area statistics are actually calculated by Eurostat and others. But I think that's a clear possibility. If you look at US inflation, what has held inflation and what you call core inflation a little bit back in terms of how quickly it sinks is what you call shelter. So the cost of your apartment, a house, cost of living. But there are lots of forward-looking indicators for shelter, and each and every one of these actually point straight down. And I've seen at least one model that predicts that by summer next year, you will have deflation, so negative inflation in the US. Not many really believe that, but below 2%, especially in the euro area, I think is a clear possibility. And I'm not in the camp that thinks that, okay, inflation comes back and that's the new normal for the future. Inflation has been falling until COVID. It was falling almost all the time since the 1980s, and was because of a combination of deflationary technologies like the internet, like computing, and so on, and globalization, and possibly also because of aging. And I don't see, globalization is changing a little bit. People are moving some production out of China, but they tend not to really move it home, but then they move it to Indonesia, Vietnam, Mexico, and so on. But the other thing that is coming is that AI will be highly deflationary. You will get computers do academic work for nothing, almost. And then, okay, but that's later. But then we'll get a wave of flexible robots from really becoming mass market around 28, I think. So what I'm trying to say here is that the trends that have been, reducing inflation since the 1980s are intact. What we saw during and after COVID was only because of government spending a lot of money during COVID while not requesting people to work. And then you had more money than products and services. And this is going back in balance, and then the inflation will continue to fall again.
So on to number 14, and that is whether a large language model will have its IQ tested above 180. And so just for context, already in 2023, GPT-4 made an IQ test score of 155. So I think this one is pretty likely that we'll see a score beyond 180. What do you think, Lars?
I think it's likely to, and that will mean that in my definition of hyperintelligence, I will see hyperintelligence. Because if you have computers or AI models that have this IQ, but which also have access to many orders of magnitude more information than any individual person can ever have, then I think they are so superior intellectually that I would call it hyperintelligence. And that means that I expect to see hyperintelligence in 2025.
I guess with hyperintelligence, we don't necessarily mean AGI. Also because I think the definition is now so fluffy and different depending on whom you ask.
AGI is artificial general intelligence, which is a little bit different, like more human-like. And hyperintelligence is just where on any intellectual endeavor you can possibly think of, it beats any personal expert.
Yeah, it's just with AGI, I've now seen definitions where people say it does most tasks better than most people. And I think if you start using that definition, well, then we're probably already there, right? And then there's some people saying, do all tasks better than all people? And then, by that definition, I think it will take a while because, you can always find some weird task that you would probably do better or that you can't, quite measure who actually does best. But moving on to the next one, and that is whether we'll see self-flying cargo planes in 2025.
The answer to that is that to some degree we already saw it. So you have already delivery services, or for instance, blood for operations and so on, from blood centers to hospitals, and this is done by drones. A pioneer in that is a company called Zipline. They started in Rwanda. I can never pronounce that country's name correctly. Rwanda, of all places, because that was where they thought it was easiest to get the permissions. But now it's spread to thousands of hospitals around the world. And in the beginning, they actually used a form of airplanes, mini airplanes, like small sort of handheld size airplanes, and then moved to more traditional drones. But we're talking about cargo planes that, lift serious amount of cargo. And I think there's a fair chance, maybe 50-50, that we'll see that permitted somewhere in the world. Where it sounds really obvious to do it is in war zones, actually. So that could be one outcome.
Yeah, and I guess it's all about regulation, right? Because I'm guessing technically it's not an issue at all, correct?
No, technically it's been a complete non-issue for a long time. So lots of passenger planes where you have 2 or 3 people in the cockpit are perfectly capable of flying completely automatically. So it's partly for psychological reasons that these people are sitting there, and you don't have these reasons for cargo planes.
Let's talk about number 16, and that are autonomous cars. So whether level 4 autonomous cars will be widely available for people in 25s. And just for context, so level 4, if I understand it correctly, would be cars that can pretty much drive by themselves except under very, very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, it can drive for hours by itself on a highway, on a country road, but you don't want it to do in the center of Manhattan, for instance, where you have tons of people making illegal crossings on the road and whatnot. So I think that will become quite widespread. It will not become mainstream, but it will begin to become quite widespread in some nations that either produce cars or always make a point out of being at the cutting edge of end of technology.
Great. And now we're going back to social media for a little bit. And we have been asked whether we will see groups like, for example, Facebook groups move into the metaverse in 2025. So I think, yes, we'll start seeing companies such as Snapchat and maybe Meta test this in 2025, but maybe not roll it out on a wider scale before 26 or 27. That is my guess, at least.
Yeah, shouldn't we say that the metaverse is not a popular thing right now?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing with Meta is that they might test for quite a long time before they actually try to release this commercially. So we'll see. It's gonna be really interesting. Back to some geopolitics. So do you think Saudi Arabia and Israel will normalize their diplomatic relations?
I think it's fairly likely. So you had the Abraham Accords during the last Trump regime, where Israel normalized the relationship with Tunisia, Morocco, the Emirates, and Kuwait. They didn't do that with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia gave permission for Israeli flights over Saudi, and that's actually a major concession. And behind the curtains, there's been lots of talk about that the next step should be that they will establish normal diplomatic relationships. And there have been lots of speculations that the timing of the Hamas attack on Israel was timed to jeopardize this process. Now, this is some time ago that this happened. There has been Israeli forces now inside the Gaza Strip ever since. We seem to be very close to an armistice there. And then I think there's a clear possibility that this will happen. And one of the many factors behind it is, first of all, it has already happened, as I said, with neighboring countries, but also the United States provide arms not only to Israel, but also to Saudi Arabia. And I think they are pretty tired of conflict. They just want to help their populations fulfill their aspirations and have a more peaceful environment. So that's my expectation. I know it's difficult to say, but that's where I would put my bet.
On to number 18, which is the US dollar ruble exchange rate. So the question we got is, will the ruble fall to the lowest point in, I guess, decades or ever, which would be below 142.6 rubles per dollar?
I think it's a clear possibility. The Russian economy is very squeezed right now. The Gazprom is running at a deficit now. It used to be a cash cow for the government. I already mentioned that Russia cannot borrow money. The inflation is way too high, much higher than the official number. The arms export has completely exploded. It was 27% of the global arms export market in 2010. It was probably 4.4% in 2024. They've lost their status in the rocket launch market to SpaceX, etc., etc. So it's not going well for the Russian economy at all. So on that basis, I think that it's clear possibility, at least, that the ruble continues to fall. In order to finance the war efforts, they can print money or empty their reserves, or a combination of those two things. And if they print money, then the ruble will have to fall. So a reason that it might not happen is that you get a quick peace agreement, and then some of the constraints on the trade, on the embargoes, etc., get released, and then they start to recover economically. But it is a possibility, yes.
So on to the economy in Argentina. So it's a quite interesting political and economical experiment we're seeing in Argentina. So the question is, will we see more than 4% GDP growth in 2025 in Argentina?
I would say yes, most likely yes. What has happened in Argentina is something that almost nobody believed, even the ones who really wanted to believe it. Almost nobody believed that they could do that. But Milei, the new president, he has actually engineered a 30% cut in public expenditure, reduction of inflation of around 90% in 1 year. And as it looks right now, it is fairly likely that it will get a very high growth in 25.
Okay, let's talk about the European Union. Do you think any countries in the European Union will be inspired by the DOGE initiative in the US and implement something similar?
Really difficult question, actually. We can exclude some. I don't think Germany will do it because Germany will probably get a coalition with CSU, CDU, CSU, including the Social Democrats, I would assume. So then they can't do it. France, I don't think they have the political strength to do it. Italy should do it. Is the candidate for it. UK will not. They're ruled by Labour. But if the Reform Party wins at the next election, I think they will do it. The Reform Party would do it, but that's a big if, and it's not now. And there's not going to be an election in 25. So it would have to be a smaller country. But if people see that the DOGE program really works, and that is a possibility, then it could be that Estonia or some small country somewhere actually decides to do the same, or Portugal or Ireland or something like that. So it's an interesting question. It's a little bit difficult to answer.
Yeah, it is interesting because if it works in the US and then we have a couple of smaller European countries where it also works, then, perhaps some of the bigger countries might see a shift in the population's opinion regarding such a program. So let's see.
Yeah.
It could happen, but I don't think it will happen next year. So on to something completely different, and I don't even know if I pronounced this question correctly, but it is whether a lozenge that restores tooth enamel is launched commercially. So I guess it's the thing that protects the teeth, some cream that would protect it.
Or a pill, but it's something you insert into your mouth that make the teeth grow. So almost anybody they will have some partly from brushing teeth, perhaps. They over the years you kind of hollow up out the teeth. Other things can also go wrong, and we are very close to seeing commercial launch of technologies that could make that grow back. But we are also very close to have commercial technologies that can grow back gums and grow back anything that you or many other things that you lose over time with stem cells and so on. So I would say 50-50 that you actually have this launch for the teeth, and that could be a signal that there's a whole new area of medical cures that are about restoring lost cells or lost material in the body that is really taking off.
Yeah, bone density, I suppose, would be a major one and a little bit similar.
Yeah, I have not seen anything specific about that, but the cartilage between the bones, let's say in your spine, would be an obvious candidate, for instance.
Yeah, that I think a lot of people 40 plus would really appreciate that.
Yeah, I could use that. Yeah.
So let's move on to computer chips. So whether we think a 2nm computer chip becomes commercially available in 2025.
Yeah, 2 nanometers. So I wrote I've written 2 books called Supertrends. I think the first one came out in 2009. And there I wrote that you cannot get below 5 nanometers. And now we're talking about 2. So I wrote what all the scientists said at the time, and they were clearly wrong because we're already below 5. 2 is really, really extreme, but there are very strong expectations that we'll see 2 nanometers chips in 25, which is unbelievable.
Fantastic. 24 is whether we will see a nuclear reactor running on thorium in 25.
There are a number of different experimental thorium reactors around the world. It's amazing if it works because it's very safe. We have thorium resources around the world enough for providing all the energy in the world for about 100,000 years. So just for perspective, the fossil fuel area, which is coal, gas, and oil, all in all will probably stretch around 300 years. So 100,000 is more than 30 times longer. And they can be made very small. They don't need to have high pressure and so on. China has an experimental reactor in the Gobi Desert. We are both Danish nationals. Denmark has Copenhagen Atomics, which develops such designs. India and Norway and other places also have activity. It's very difficult to find out what will actually be launched where. There's some secrecy, but I would say it is a clear possibility that somebody announces that they have a design that in an experimental reactor actually works.
And on to the final question for 2025 is basically whether we'll be able to bring back extinct species with cloning.
So are we talking about an embryo or?
Yeah, just the embryo to start with, yeah.
So if you look at all the different projects that are ongoing right now to resurrect extinct species like the Jurassic Park movie, they're working on it, they're implementing it. A lot of predictions are that somewhere between, say, 2028 and the early 2030s, we will see some of these extinct species being resurrected, walking around or flying around on Earth. The question is if somebody will actually achieve an embryo of one of these in 25. I would guess no, but I would not completely refute it because, as I said, they have been working, a number of teams have been working on the mammoths, the dodo, the passenger, what is called the passenger something, but the American bird and so on, lots of different projects. And what I do think is that definitely in 2030s, we will be amazed to see some of these animals resurrected.
Well, that brings us to the end of our list, but I actually wanted to ask you one more thing. When we're going to look back at 25 and 24 in terms of like meaningful innovation that really changes the world, do you think we'll see like a further acceleration and that like 2025 will be at a different level than 2024 was?
Yeah, so in our company Supertrends, we have mapped this, the global innovation actually going back 3.3 million years, and when not much happened, I have to say, for a long, long time. There were periods where there could be several 100,000 years between each innovation, and then it was, maybe 70,000 years and 50,000, 20,000, and so on, less and less. And now we are up to hundreds of really important innovations per year, and there are many days where we see a number of significant innovations. It has accelerated massively the last, I would say, 2 years, and as we predict that this will continue to accelerate massively over the next few years. AI play a completely central role in that, especially the self-play that AI does, for instance, to find out how proteins fold in 3D, how these proteins then will react with each other, or simulating the real world, for instance, by simulating auto drive and other things, where you have a model of the real world, but the model runs maybe 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 times faster than the real world, creates so much data so quickly that it pushes everything forward at a frantic pace. So in terms of the world history of innovation, we are living in a completely unique period right now. So if you like innovation, this is a very unique period to live in.
And that's a wrap for the top 25 predictions from the Mind Blowers podcast. But hey, the real question is, what do you think? Will 2025 blow our minds with incredible breakthroughs? Will Bitcoin and the stock market shatter records? We dove deep into over 4,000 expert predictions, crunched mountains of data, and unleashed the power of AI to bring you the most accurate forecast possible. Here's to an amazing 2025. Join us next week for more mind-blowing insights right here on the Mind Blowers podcast.